What it do? Just like that, you blink, and it's week 7 of NFL action. Welcome into the Three Dudes Fantasy Football Show. Two dudes with you this Friday night. You know what we do, get you ready for the weekend. We hit you with our TNF takes, big breakdown of Thursday Night Football. You've been reading the articles. You've been crushing the rankings. So we're just going to give you some hot takes on everything going into Sunday. JJ Buck, Aaron Hernandez, Mr. Steven Masterson, making plans on Friday night. First, it's Aaron having a life, then Steve with his kids. What is going on with y'all? But we are here. Got the Fantasy Bear in the background as well, keeping us company. And a nice Mark Brunell jersey behind Mr. A.A. Ron there. And we'll get into those Jacksonville Jaguars. But Aaron, Thursday Night Football, we get an opportunity to have the takes on what we saw. And yes, I'm a Broncos fan, but I really haven't been able to wrap my head around this team this season. 33-10 victory over the Saints. They controlled that football game. They're 4-3, and they're a legit wild card contender right now. But you're also looking at an offense with Bo Nix that lacks explosiveness. Some of the passing metrics he's been worst in the league at. 4 games this season, he doesn't have a touchdown pass. But yet here they are, 4-3. He's running with the football back-to-back games with 60-plus yards rushing. You look at an offense that didn't target Cortland Sutton and got a big old goose egg there, but yet they're finding ways to win games. Just from a football standpoint, it's really hard to peg who the Broncos are. It's a team that has a good defense that's giving them the chance, and you keep your fingers crossed that Bo Nix can grow and they can find some explosiveness and that offense. But the biggest thing to me was, yes, they were in control because of their defense, but they ran the football. They haven't been able to do that enough this season to take some of that pressure off Bo Nix. And if Sean Payton can commit to running the football, you have a player in Javonte Williams that can be an RB2 potentially even the rest of the way. He went off 26 points last night, had 2 touchdowns, made an impact in the receiving game. When you look at this Broncos team, man, how do you wrap your mind around what you're seeing, from, of course, who they are in the field to then equating any of that to useful fantasy plays for us?
It's been an interesting roller coaster. There really hasn't been much fantasy wise going on, and you finally saw Javonte Williams, turn in what we kind of were hoping to see from him. So it's been interesting watching Bo Nix too. There's a lot of passes, yesterday that I was like, what? But somehow you guys are scrappy. Denver's scrappy. They have a few plays here and there. They get Bo Nix to run, I don't know how much down the field, way too much. And the surprise to me was Cortland Sutton not being involved at all. But watching some of these passes, it's like I guess I could kind of see that. So it's like
it's hard for Bronco fans right now because you have the excitement of a first-round quarterback. You're trying to develop Bo Nix, but some of the things you see, and you can say they lack explosive players offensively. They do. And so if Bo Nix was in an offense where he was throwing to DJ Moore and Keenan Allen, Roma Dunze, does that look different? Possibly. But you're also looking for flashes in being an elevator at times, and he did throw 2 touchdown passes last week, but that was a game they lost to the Chargers. LA actually controlled that game, scoring 23 points. And from a fantasy standpoint, Bo is someone probably, if you're playing in super flex 2 quarterback leagues, the amount of quarterbacks that are out there, he's someone that you're probably playing at some point in time, but you're just banking on the rushing total. 75 rushing yards last night. It was able to get him up to 14 points because he didn't throw any touchdown passes, but the thing is no turnovers. So from just a football standpoint, if he's not turning the football over, trying to make plays downfield, but this is a guy that played 5 years in college. He has a ton of experience. So you were hoping there wasn't that big of a curve where you're seeing some of those passes, like the moment where he had Franklin and his tight end down the field and he throws it in between them. 2 players wide open.
Oh, yeah.
He split the difference, and you're just scratching your head. So what does that mean from a fantasy perspective? outside of Javonte Williams, there's no one I want to play. Maybe I would, if I needed wide receiver depth, if I had some questions, guys have been in and out of the lineup, would I hold Cortland Sutton? Yeah, just because of the potential target value there. You look at what Sutton was doing. He had 0 targets last night, but he had 13 points in 3 of his last 5 games. So he's that flex play, that wide receiver fill-in injury bye week, just because he can be the target, but he's not someone you can start every week at this point in time. That's why I moved off of him, because I had the wide receiver depth this season, but the only one for me is Javonte Williams. I think we're looking at a top 20 back for next week, and someone that you can confidently have on your roster, because Williams' performance has been a little bit all over the place last 3 games before last night. Had 10 points, 16 points, 4 points. But when you got the Carolina Panthers on deck, I think you can confidently keep rolling into next week with Javonte Williams.
Yeah, absolutely. It's strange because I wanted to pick up Cortland for all the reasons that you outlined. It's like I wasn't able to grab him. I wanted to start him because I need wide receiver depth right now. I'm kind of in between on some player trades, but I'm kind of glad that I didn't, because he would have been a big old donut there for my flex. So
speaking of big old donuts, that's the New Orleans Saints without Derek Carr at the quarterback position. It was an uphill battle for Spencer Rattler, making his second career start, the 4th-round pick out of South Carolina. You go into that game, no Chris Olave, no Rashid Shaheed, but the game plan was questionable. Only 7 carries for Alvin Kamara. Like, he didn't tank you, at least in PPR leagues, because he had 6 receptions, so he got up to 8 points, so you didn't get the Cortland Sutton goose egg. But that is now 3 straight games. And yes, injuries played a huge factor into it. But even on a short week, I thought the Saints would commit to the run game a lot more, try to find some explosive plays there. But you credit a Broncos defense. That's been good this season. They're a team that shut down the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. It's why they've won 4 games this season, because of what they're doing defensively. So I don't want to go over the top, because the Saints, you can't start anyone right now. Like, Rashid Shaheed done for the season, and that's a bummer. He was so explosive. He had 4 games with 20-plus points. Chris Olave, the concussion. Kamara is someone I think you just have to keep playing. But everyone else, until there's a competent quarterback, and that quarterback would be Derek Carr, like even Chris Olave, you can't play him. Everyone was on the Bub Means train trying to scramble for that emergency quarterback or emergency wide receiver. He didn't do anything. Like, it's Kamara, because you think, hey, this is
it's Kamara,
one of the best players.
Yeah.
But you saw last night, Broncos took him out of the game, 7 carries, 10 yards. And if you're a half-point league or a standard league, you're chasing points now.
Oh, yeah. And it's tough for the Saints, because even when Derek Carr comes back, it's like I don't know how to see where that team's going. It seemed like they kind of gave up in a sense. It's like their hearts weren't in that game. So it's going to be an interesting.
At halftime.
I did see that too, and I was like, a little bit to that, but you got to credit the Broncos defense too, just getting after the rookie, quarterback.
Sacked him 6 times, 2 fumbles in there, had a fumble return for a touchdown, and it's pretty much the only Saint you could start is Kamara, and just keep your fingers crossed that they can develop a run game, get some explosive plays out of it. If you're in a PPR league, if he's at least getting those catches, he had 6 catches for 14 yards. So maybe next game it's 6 for 30 and a little bit more in the rushing, so you can get to that 10-plus point plateau. But I think that's why you also saw Saints coach Dennis Allen after the game hint at Taysom Hill potentially taking some snaps under center, because he said Taysom Hill would be closer to coming back than Derek Carr. And Taysom Hill is just, you need him at H-back, you need him at tight end. If he's your best option at quarterback right now, I don't even know if you can start Chris Olave if Taysom Hill is there. You can't start Chris Olave right now. I think even Spencer Rattler is playing, even if he could end up being the dominant target hog. But what do you see? All right, say Olave's back, Alvin Kamara. Are those 2 players you have to start if it's Spencer Rattler next week?
I think Kamara, you're going to have to absolutely. The one thing I kind of feel like they try not to do is run him into the ground at the same time. there's a little bit of caution in my mind for that. Olave's a big question mark for me. I don't know what to do with him if when he's out there. It's like hopefully something turns into fruition, but I have concerns. So it's like, mm.
That sound sums up the New Orleans Saints right now. They
Oh
opened this
yeah,
season scoring 40 plus points in 2 games, but they ended up playing the Panthers and the Dallas Cowboys, who we know are just not a good football team right now. And then the last 3 weeks losses to Philadelphia, Atlanta, Kansas City, going into the Broncos game last night, and they were hoping for something. It's rookie versus rookie, and another blowout loss for the
I
Saints.
mean those are good teams that they lost to, and apparently the Broncos are too. They kind of remind me of a 2017 Jacksonville Light.
Yeah, we'll see if they can find some more of that explosiveness in the offense. But TNF takes for you. You can play Javonte Williams and confidently, even as a top 20 running back going into next week with that matchup against the Panthers. Kamara is almost, you just have to play him because he's Alvin Kamara, but potentially think about other options if it's going to be Spencer Rattler, Jay Kaner at quarterback. And Taysom Hill definitely is intriguing if he's playing, if you're in, again, super flex 2 quarterback league, because he's going to have those rushing totals. He'll push football down the field some. But the Saints are just, man, if you can go somewhere else at this moment in time. Speaking of going somewhere else, see those trades this week?
There's some
Davante
good
Adams
ones.
to the New York Jets. Amari Cooper to the Buffalo Bills. And we all knew the game that Davante was playing, that when he landed in New York, that hamstring would be good and he'd be ready to roll with his BFF, Aaron Rodgers. And funny enough, these are 2 players that are on your fantasy team
They are.
in our league right now. You are our resident bleep off if you're a rookie fantasy owner. You go in on experienced players, guys that we know what they can do and bring to the table. I want to start with Davante Adams and go into the Jets. And he's someone that I would play this week. I would put him back in my lineup because he can keep it simple with Aaron Rodgers. Those two have been on the same page. Rodgers going to feed him some back shoulder throws. I think potentially get him a look in the red zone. They're not going to have to do too much to get on the same page. I like Davante Adams this weekend because I do think that relationship will pay off. But from this weekend on, how are you feeling now about Davante back with Rodgers in that Jets offense?
It's a good thing when you look at it on paper of who his quarterback is, but how you've looked at the Jets offense and how it's not necessarily been a high powered, well-oiled machine necessarily. So hopefully it improves that offense. I think Devontae's going to be that alpha in the, out on the field for wide receivers. But I actually do think this may possibly open things up for Garrett Wilson a little bit more, because they're going to have to cover Davante Williams, and he's commands a little bit of respect, even though he's a little bit older. So that's kind of how I see it going. But
It's going to be interesting to see the pecking order. Because
mhm,
you got back-to-back games where Rodgers just started feeding Garrett Wilson targets. Now they're back-to-back games the Jets lost. So just from a football standpoint, they had that loss to the Vikings and then the loss to the Bills on Monday Night Football. You felt, maybe he was getting some of that chemistry with Wilson. And Aaron Rodgers touched on it this week. I think it was with McAfee, his hit that it was
mhm.
doing. Like, hey, that means people can't double Garrett Wilson. Well,
Yep.
I was trying to think back and thinking, his time in Green Bay. Was there ever a number 2 that developed in those offenses? Like, you had Randall Cobb, but I don't know, was Randall Cobb ever someone we were thinking about fantasy wise? So he's talking that, it could open things up for Garrett Wilson, and I'm intrigued. I want to see if Aaron Rodgers can keep those 2 targets happy, because it will be better for the offense. And also we saw Brees
Right.
Hall with the new play
Exactly.
caller, not named Nathaniel Hackett, also have a really good game both on the ground and receiving wise. So you think I think Brees Hall probably would be the biggest beneficiary for this if teams kind of have to, playing 2 safeties and more shell coverage.
Yeah, I absolutely agree on that. It's like I think Brees Hall finally starts hitting the stride long term for fantasy production, and we'll see who on the pass catching who ends up, being the one. I think there's a chance that he could carry both of those, be fantasy relevant, but we got to see. I was like, Aaron Rodgers playing a little banged up, and he's old.
Yeah. So the one dude on the outside looking in is Mike Williams, because he absolutely got thrown under the bus after that game by Aaron Rodgers. We all learned what the term red line was. It's like Mike Williams should have been running down the red line, but he went this way, and then I threw it that way, and he still threw a bad pass to Mike Williams in back-to-back weeks. That was on Aaron Rodgers. You go back to the end of the Minnesota game, they're driving down 6. He severely underthrows Mike Williams on the sideline and gets picked off. And the same thing happens. Now it's a deeper throw downfield, but he's trying to target Mike Williams, and you saw Williams had to stop. He was sliding to the ground. It was a great interception made by Rapp on that. But still, like, those are 2 bad throws from Aaron Rodgers. It's not going to be on him. It's going to be on Mike Williams. And so they get Mike Williams out of the pecking order, insert Davante Adams. And it's easy to think, oh, Garrett Wilson will be number 2, but he's also got his other guy that he trusts in Allen Lazard.
Oh, yeah. But that's definitely an X factor in there because, if talking about it, it's like Allen Lazard was probably, one of his go-tos that he trusts, and you just got to be on Aaron Rodgers' trust list, and you'll see glory. So
now they have the Steelers in Pittsburgh on Sunday Night Football. I've looked at this week, discussing it on the opening drive as a must-win game for the New York Jets. They're 2-4 right now, and if they want to be in that wild card race, this would be huge because they have a loss to the Denver Broncos, who are now ahead of them. The Steelers are going to be a wild card race team because they are 4-2 right now. Now we'll see if it's Justin Fields or Russell Wilson starting at quarterback. Because if the Jets can win this game on Sunday Night Football, going into Pittsburgh and getting that dub, they have a nice schedule where they can actually get back on track heading up to their bye week because they play in New England after that. Tough one against the Houston Texans, but then they get a trip to Arizona and the Indianapolis Colts. So it's a bounce back opportunity for the Green Bay Packers. I'm really interested to see, how Aaron Rodgers handles that passing game. But in terms of fantasy this week, I do believe in that BFF connection. And I would have Davante Adams in my lineup rolling. And you're not benching Garrett Wilson, locking in Breece Hall and Allen Lazard. Might be chasing the numbers, chasing that Hail Mary, but he's probably someone I'm leaving on my bench just till I see how this passing game works out. Plus, it's a tough matchup in Pittsburgh against that Steelers defense. So you can't, I think at this point in time, count on 3 Jets wide receivers to be fantasy relevant this weekend. The other receiver that is now relevant is Amari Cooper. And Cooper gets out from under Deshaun Watson, who's been a mess and has some of the worst passing metrics in the league. Still, the Cleveland Browns have not scored 20 points in a football game. Still,
no, they haven't.
The Cleveland Browns have not had 300 yards total offense in a football game. And with all that being said, Amari Cooper is 24 catches on the season, or still more than any Buffalo Bills wide receiver has. So in that bad Bills offense, the Browns offense, you get Amari to Buffalo. I love the move because for me, I like when a wide receiver can be an addition to a team. I don't think there's a wide receiver that would make an average team like a playoff contender. Like I don't see like them having that type of impact. So Cooper going into a good established team, then I think you get a positive impact from this wide receiver trade. But I would sit Amari Cooper this weekend. Now I do have some players to play instead of him if they are available, but Amari Cooper owner life. We know he can have winning weeks, but how do you see him fitting into this offense that we saw at the end of last season? They kind of phased out Stephon Diggs, and Josh Allen has been spreading it around. Now they needed that vertical threat. Amari Cooper brings that, but how do you see him playing now in Buffalo?
Hey, that's a good question because I've been waiting to see, the wide receiver one show up on that team, and it hasn't necessarily yet. So I want to say that it might be a little rough for week 1 with him this first week, but I was like, I like the move. I was like, I think Josh Allen has kind of needed it. Nobody's stepped up. It's like Dalton Kincaid's not necessarily Keon Coleman. None of these other receivers are necessarily, fantasy relevant in my opinion. So it's like, hopefully, it, he can kind of bring that consistency, having Josh Allen as quarterback and James Cook will be back on it. And we'll see how this goes because this is a big addition to the Bills offense, in my opinion. So
Absolutely.
it's like,
they were a good team already, and now that offense has a chance to open itself back up. And I think it just makes everyone better. It makes Dalton Kincaid better. It makes Khalil Shakir better. And I think Shakir can still be, that wide receiver 3 flex play in PPR
yeah,
leagues. And to me, Cooper, I would be okay with playing the wait and see approach this weekend, even though it's Amari Cooper. He's going to Buffalo. It's to me, it's different than the connection we know that Adams and Rodgers have. Like I do
yeah.
trust
We've
back play together versus
we've seen that one before, and we know that how that quarterback is with his receivers. It's like, yeah, Josh Allen and this developing into that. It's like,
I give it a week. So what would I do? I know some teams like you might not have an option to have someone that you feel starting over Amari Cooper, even if he is on a limited snap count in this game for Buffalo this weekend. But a couple players I'd look at, and you look at the available on the waiver wire. Michael Wilson, Arizona Cardinals. He only saw 4 targets last week in the loss to the Packers, but he scored a touchdown. Has 22 targets over his previous 3 games. Marvin Harrison Jr. has been on the field, but he's still a question. So that could even make his role larger. And that is a Monday night game of Arizona and the LA Chargers. Wilson, again, getting those red zone looks from Kyler Murray and Xavier Legette. Someone we'll talk about a little bit later, too. 22 targets. He's produced a touchdown reception and double-digit points in 2 of his last 3 games. And the Panthers have the Commanders. Yes, Commanders are a fun offensive football team. They still are terrible defensively when it comes to stopping wide receivers. Now, there's just a couple names that I would consider playing if I had the room, maybe just to play the wait and see approach on Amari Cooper. But I know that's hard to do, right? Someone with that name brand value, putting them on the bench. But I just feel that he will be somewhat limited just in week 1 until he can get a full week of practice under his belt and have a couple conversations with Josh Allen.
yeah, I absolutely agree. It's like I'm kind of on the one where it's like I might have to start him. We'll see on the waiver wire, who could be a better fit.
So the wide receiver trades, I think, are going to be beneficial. Davante Adams, Amari Cooper, guys that you were relying on now have life. And I think the rest of the season, Cooper could be a top 20 wide receiver. Like
Mhm.
back to and have a weekly floor that we haven't seen from him in a while. We know Cooper can win you weeks. Right? He can win you the week, and he still had those big games over the last couple seasons. But I think now we're going to see down the stretch, especially second half of the season when he gets comfortable in that offense, like a consistent floor that we haven't seen
And that
from a lot of Amari Cooper.
would be so nice. And the one thing I want to go back and kind of touch real quick is the Browns and
Yeah.
that offense and Nick Chubb, coming back here in a little bit. It's like, how do you feel with Nick Chubb coming back to that offense? It's like, I don't know.
Well, again, I know a lot of people stash Nick Chubb and they are waiting for him to come back. I think it's going to be a slow approach, coming off another major knee injury. But if he's on the field, I think a lot of people are going to slot him into RB2. Am I playing him this weekend? Well, I hope if you're sitting on him, you were able to do enough to where you don't have to throw him in right away. But this offense eventually is going to feature Nick Chubb. And I think feature Nick Chubb at the highest role he can be in this season, depending on how his body is responding, because they have nothing else. Deshaun Watson has been so bad.
It's
We'll see,
been
Jerry Jeudy
terrible.
sliding into the wide receiver 1 role, but we just watched Amari Cooper have a whole lot of uncatchable targets from Deshaun Watson, so that's not changing. I know a lot of
No.
people have been talking up David Njoku, and is he going to be a target hog? But I don't trust Watson. I'd be interested in Nick Chubb
I
because Watson doesn't have to throw him the football. He just hands it to him.
There's only so much running you can do when you're down.
Yeah.
And it's like you haven't scored, 20 points. So it's like
And they're 5.5 point underdogs this weekend against Cincinnati.
Yep. So I don't know. I'm if I had Nick Chubb, I'm still kind of concerned that he might not turn any value, in my opinion, for a long time.
Jerome Ford being banged up, it's an opportunity. We'll probably see some Deontay Foreman, and then
there definitely will be
Nick Chubb this weekend. But as you get deeper, Nick Chubb's the one Brown that I think you do play because you just keep your fingers crossed. Ball forward into them. It's kind of like the Alvin Kamara
Nick
situation.
Chubb, yep.
Environment, right? It's you are banking on the production that we've seen even coming off a major injury just because there's nothing else there in Cleveland. And you brought up a good point. If they're in negative game scripts,
all the time.
It's not at some point you're Nick Chubb, but you're Nick Chubb off another major knee injury. And
I know that's
factor into who you are. It's not going to be as simple as set it and forget it.
Exactly.
So that takes us into what do you want to see this weekend? It's our fantasy spin NFL Week 7. You brought up the Browns, and one of the things I want to see this weekend, I'm really interested in this Texans-Packers game because the Packers wide receivers. This is how you pick a Packers wide receiver to play. You do this right here. Jalen Reed has been the go-to guy. He's been banged up a little bit. Dontavian Wicks, the waiver wire darling, week to week with a shoulder injury. Absolute dud for everyone that spent on him. And Christian Watson comes back, 50-plus yards and a touchdown downfield. Romeo Doubs misses the game, comes back, has 2 touchdowns. I just am interested in the Packers wide receivers because it's always someone else, and you just hope that you're able to pick the right one to play at any given moment. But this should be a fun game. We get CJ Stroud and Jordan Love, and I want to see how both passing attacks go because we also did see, and we'll touch on it a little bit, Tank Dell step up, but specifically the Packers wide receivers. Oh, and you can't forget Tucker Kraft being in there. Is this one that we know the offense can be so explosive? Jordan Love is good that if you have one of these guys, you just play them and keep your fingers crossed.
Yeah, it's a little bit of a wide receiver carousel, pass catcher carousel roulette, however you want to put it. But generally, someone will hit, and hopefully it is you. So it's like if you don't need the consistency in your lineup, but you can plug in someone that's possibly going to score, you're playing a Packer. It's their offense is there. It's starting to get a little bit into stride now that Jordan Love's getting a little bit more healthy. So it's definitely, you definitely got to play him.
You got the plotter out there and pretty much spend weekly 10 points, Josh Jacobs. So we'll see if, that spark. They can find a spark. They paid him pretty good money in the offseason, move off him. And we saw Aaron Jones, who was a nice start to the season for the undefeated Minnesota Vikings. By the way, Jones dealing with that injury against the Lions. That's going to be a fascinating game, too. Detroit at Minnesota. The Vikings 1.5 point favorites at home. So Aiden Hutchinson, we saw the nasty leg injury that he had. The defense takes a little bit of a hit because you lose one of the top 3 defensive players. So that opens things up, I think, for the Vikings. And if you want someone to think about playing this weekend, Ty Chandler could be in there. If Aaron Jones is limited against a front that lost Hutchinson, maybe that opens up a little bit more time too for Sam Darnold. So Justin Jefferson, Addison downfield. I'm just interested to see how the Lions respond because, they destroyed the Cowboys. They were trying to get their offensive lineman touchdowns in that game. But now having to play a little bit different because Hutchinson was one of the few special game-changing defenders in the NFL.
Oh, yeah. It's like that. That injury hurts that pass rush so much. He's a big part of that team. And I'm curious to see them going into Minnesota. It's like Minnesota wants to make a statement, in my opinion. It's like it's been a long time since they've been this good. It might be 6-0 first time since, 2009, I think I read. it's going to be tough. It's going to be a good game, and it's going to be a must watch. So
Yeah, tons. This is start everyone you have. It's I think you're
yeah,
playing Addison and Justin Jefferson is a lock. I think Ty Chandler does become interesting if you're looking for that running back play this weekend because Aaron Jones has been limited, even though they're coming off the bye week. There's still something to watch going into the week. And then for the Lions, Williams has become a playable wide receiver every week, and especially in 3 wide receiver leagues. Jameson Williams. Don't have to talk about Amon-Ra St. Brown, but we saw Sam Laporta get off on a
finally,
flea flicker touchdown, and Laporta is just in that must-start territory at tight end with the draft capital that you invested in. And then, of course, the backfield. It's still working. Gibbs and Montgomery producing fantasy points like crazy. David Montgomery just got an extra 2 years and $18 million. And I think that has been one of the funnest things to see from a fantasy perspective is the fact that they're making it work. And David Montgomery is still just putting his head down, getting yards. And there's times in the game you wonder, like, are they going to put Gibbs back on the field? Like, Montgomery
yeah,
has been impressive in
yeah.
Detroit.
He's been better than I actually expected, fantasy wise, and it's like he's determined and he looks good. So it's like there's times like you said, it's like Montgomery's out there, and is Gibbs gonna get out there? It's like just keep rolling.
And another thing I'm interested in seeing this weekend is the dynamic between the Dolphins and the Colts. And so you have a Miami team that Mike McDaniel talked about that he pretty much told the world, he believes Tua is playing football again this year. He didn't say exactly when, but he said we'll see Tua Tagovailoa back on the football field because the Dolphins have been a disaster without Tua. I think Mike McDaniel's feeling some of the heat. Is you still have Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill, Devon Achane, and you can't produce any explosive plays. You can't get by. And a game Miami. So I ran across this going into this weekend.
Mhm.
The points per game from last year to this year, they're minus 25. They're scoring 25 less points right now than they were this year. And you'd expect a dip. Yeah, you don't have Tua. But it highlights, there's pressure on this team even without Tua. Boy genius, Mike McDaniel. Are you going to get an explosive play from Tyreek Hill? You have a stable of running backs. How are you not creating more running plays? And I understand game plans are different. It's the NFL. Defenses are honing on in things. But I also watched Matt LaFleur in 2 weeks with Malik Willis win football games. And
Yeah,
you're
and
telling
it's
me you can't figure that out in Miami to salvage a game?
that's why he's getting a little bit under the hot seat there because there's so much talent. Like you said, LaFleur was able to do it with Malik Willis. Malik Willis looked pretty dang good, completing almost all of his passes. So it's like it's tough one. But luckily, what the Dolphins have going for them, and we'll see how it turns out, is they're going to be going up against Anthony Richardson. So
how about that? How wild is that? So the Colts are 3-point home favorites right now over the Dolphins this weekend. And the fantasy world doesn't want to see Anthony Richardson play right now. The darling, hey, this is going to be a top 5 quarterback this season. Go all in on Anthony Richardson. And it was like, wait a second. The rushing wasn't there early in the season. Had that one good game, week 1 right there against Houston. But he's been banged up, not throwing the football downfield. It looks like a guy that only started 13 games before being drafted in the NFL. He needs more time to develop. But that's the challenge for Indianapolis. Is that development going to come just sitting and in practice, or do you just have to throw him out there and play him? Shane Steichen, the Colts head coach, said when healthy, Anthony Richardson is our quarterback. And the fantasy community is like, oh no, because Josh Downs is not playable. Michael Pittman is not playable. Those guys are must plays if Joe Flacco is a quarterback.
Yes. And it kind of comes down to, like you said, it's like, Flacco's an established veteran quarterback. He's going to play competent quarterback play. And it's like Anthony Richardson, you can see some of his decision making, some of his inexperience a little bit there, definitely. And you would think, this would be a good thing, but it's like from the fantasy and even from the football perspective, I've been reading a lot of comments of fans of them wanting just to keep Flacco, the whole year. And it's like, Richardson needs to develop. And I personally think it would be better him on the sidelines a little bit, practice, like you said. I know there's a lot of the way the NFL has been working lately with, young quarterbacks. It's just like throw them in there, but I think it hurts their development in the long term. It makes it drag out. So
It's tough because everyone is chasing CJ Stroud and Jalen Daniels. It's getting that spark and having the guy that comes in right away and plays really well. And Caleb Williams, for a couple weeks, people were questioning him, and then nice game. Playing the Jaguars absolutely helps your confidence. But I think with young quarterbacks, you have to have everyone on board. It's kind of what we're seeing with Bo Nix. Like there's times that you're frustrated, but you have to keep pushing forward, develop around him, or you end up in the Bryce Young situation. Now, does Bryce Young have the ability to play at the NFL level? No, but you also saw Bryce Young in year one last year have a head coach that was fired, and that affects your development to go into this season and then be benched after 2 games. He was outright bad. I get it. But then you're wondering, it's that process that you're talking about. Is this the right time now that they took a step back for Bryce Young to see if they can salvage anything out of him? And is that what they need to do in Indianapolis? And I do think it's a fair conversation to have for the Colts.
Absolutely.
We're looking around things we want to see this weekend. Offenses trying to create something that is a fascinating dynamic. The skill players that aren't producing in that game, because you get Anthony Richardson back, I think everyone would be excited. That's not the case right now, especially just from a fantasy football perspective, because, man, Josh Downs was balling with Joe Flacco. It was fun to watch. Those are some of the things we are looking forward to as we head into week 7 of the NFL season. One of the things that we do here on a 3 Dudes Fantasy Football Show is we try to use all the information and a little bit of our gut instinct to give you a player that needs to be in your lineup. That if you're putting together those daily fantasy lineups, you know what, like this guy might be a little off the radar or be down the last couple of weeks, but this player is going to go off. We've been a little up and down, had some hits early, been off a week. We need to be better. And let's look at week 6 before we plant our flag for this week. Shout out to Steve. He was on the bounce back game. Tank Dell was quiet, even with the extra opportunity. He bounced back in a big way, 18.7 points. I fell into the trap of thinking I could get 6 for 60 and maybe even a touchdown on George Pickens in that offense against the Raiders. Nope, not so fast, my friend. Just 8.3 points in. Aaron, you were on it, just not the right guy.
Nope. It was like 2 touchdowns, Cole Kmet, 2 touchdowns to Keenan Allen, who I didn't think was going to be the one to score, but that's what happens when I say he's not going to score. So
maybe it's a trend. It's 1 week too early for Steve, and just play maybe the player opposite wherever Aaron says. But Odunze, just 6 points last week. So we're going to try to be better this week. When we plant our flag, the player that needs to be in your lineup, the player that could be the difference in a big old daily fantasy tournament field. And I'm going to plant my flag with a Carolina Panthers wide receiver, Xavier Legette. We mentioned him a little bit earlier, someone that maybe you'd even play over Amari Cooper, but I would play him, especially in daily fantasy this weekend. He has found the end zone in 2 of the last 3 games. He is a player that Andy Dalton is developing trust in, that they get him involved in the offense. And they're playing a Washington Commanders team that has given up the 6th most points to wide receivers. This secondary is very gettable. The Panthers could be in a negative game script, chasing points against the Commanders. Deontay Johnson was limited in a Friday practice after not practicing for 2 days this week. I think Xavier Legette could be a guy that gets you in the end zone, that sees a good amount of targets and receptions this week against the Commanders. So I'm planting my flag with Legette and the Carolina Panthers.
Yeah, I definitely like that one, JJ. Definitely do. So for me, I'll plant my flag, and I think we already talked about this a little bit off camera, but it's going to be, a team against the defense. It's like New England Patriots against Jacksonville Jaguars. It's like play your players. So it's like Drake May. If you're desperate at quarterback, you need someone. I think this is definitely going to be a week where, we still don't have Tyson Campbell. He's questionable. Our secondary is atrocious. Our pass rush is inconsistent. Definitely think there's going to be, some scoring, and it will be a game, but Patriots will be able to score. And if you need a wide receiver or two, and I could do a 1B, would be Demario Douglas off of waivers, because he might be there on waivers. Should be. So he'd be one to start too. So I got 1A and 1B.
Drake May and Pop Douglas. Just play your Patriots. Maybe Antonio Gibson. Maybe Ramondre Stevenson if he comes back. Heck, Hunter Henry. Just play your Patriots against the Jaguars. That's the way you're feeling right now.
Oh yeah, and Stevenson, I believe, traveled to London, so he's probably going to play. But him and Gibson splitting touches, it'll someone will get in the end zone. I have a feeling there'll be touchdowns for the Patriots.
So
and the bigger question is like if Jacksonville loses, is there going to be a head coach on the way home?
Does Doug Peterson get to take the team playing back to Jacksonville?
Yes,
or do they put him on the Titanic and send him back? Because the Jaguars are the Titanic right now. What's up? So you nailed it, and you were right on. You're a Jaguars fan. You watch the games, but you are an objective fan too, and you touched on it. Tank Bigsby, who the fantasy community loves, did not play when the opportunity came up. Travis Etienne gets hurt out of the game, and it was Dearness Johnson. And why was that? Because of pass protection. The Jaguars needing it back in that game. It was the Johnson show, not the Bigsby show. And everyone's waiting for a Tank to explode. I think he could be playable against the Patriots defense, potentially in a flex position. But is that what would hold Tank from really taking off? Is the fact that they don't trust him in pass pro, then that limits his potential pass reps as well.
Yeah, it's definitely been an obvious thing, and I think even Steven pointed that out too. It's not good at pass blocking, and they need to protect Trevor Lawrence because our O line's not necessarily the best either. So it's like when that running back's in there to pass block, he's critical. So it definitely is hurting. ETN getting hurt, I don't know how hurt he is, considering looks like he's on pace to play. So that watching that team's so weird. It looks like people want to play, but people give up. There's been teammates calling out the team. There's just been everywhere. But Bigsby, you hope that he turns out to be what he is, and it's still not there yet. But what's sad is him and Dearness Johnson eat into ETN too much.
So. A tough backfield right now, even though people are wanting Tank Bigsby to take off. Opportunity might not be there because as much as they're struggling, again, you're talking about game scripts and the running backs that can pass protect, the running backs that catch football in the backfield in negative game scripts are going to get more looks. And now with Johnson over Bigsby. And that also, one to watch is going to be what happens in the Tampa Bay Buccaneers backfield. And we saw last week in a blowout performance, Sean Tucker, the RB3, finds the end zone. Bucky Irvin has been one of those guys that people are clamoring for to get more and more touches, a rookie out of Oregon. So Bucky Irvin has 47 snaps last week. Sean Tucker has 26. That was with Rachaad White out of the lineup. And then all he had is Todd Bowles come out this week and said, yeah, we might play all three running backs, go with the hot hand approach, which you love to hear for fantasy football.
Oh yeah, that's literally the worst thing to hear in fantasy football. It's like we're gonna roll with whoever's the hot hand. So it's like it's literally a roll of the dice when you play those players, and that's kind of one thing that scares me. I hate to hear that. So
now the fact that Baker Mayfield, the touchdown maker, the making Tampa Bay a high flying offense, Chris Godwin is someone that could be the fantasy MVP, honestly, this season. If
right now he's
production
honestly is.
And we discussed it in last week's episode, looking at some of our best value picks, and Chris Godwin took that home in a big way right now. But yeah, there's things you're looking for in these backfields, and these question marks right now, especially with players that you think can take off. So he's not here, but our third amigo, the third musketeer, the man who sometimes has a plan, Steven Masterson. He sent a blind resume. So we can play blind resume, and Aaron is a blind man in this
definitely
situation. So we got 2 quarterbacks and 2 wide receivers. One of these quarterbacks, universally owned, upwards of 95%. Started every single week. The other one, not so much. So QB1 has 6 touchdowns, 6 interceptions, 1,200 passing yards, 14.2 fantasy points per game. QB2, 6 touchdowns, 4 interceptions, has 164 rushing yards shipping in there, 14.4 points per game. So both are not like feeling great average quarterback numbers. QB1, who do you think that is?
Mahomes.
It's Patrick Mahomes. It is the quarterback that's been on average QB 17 since the start of last season. And quarterback number 2 who's matching and just a little bit better than Patrick Mahomes, who would be, yes, the real life guy you're taking all day, every day. But you can't start Patrick Mahomes and think he's winning your fantasy games right now every single weekend. Who is not just matching Patrick Mahomes in points per game, but giving you a whole extra 0.2 points?
I'm trying to think. I was like six touchdowns, 4 interceptions. I don't know.
Daniel Jones.
Brock.
Daniel Jones is that quarterback that is right there, the
Danny
same
Dimes
fantasy level of Patrick Mahomes, and someone that's intriguing with the amount that he runs the football. Someone that's interesting too, with Malik Neighbors coming back into the lineup. Tyrone Tracy has been phenomenal the last 2 weeks. He's going to eat into Devin Singletary. Should get the carries over Devin Singletary. And all of a sudden, looking at a really interesting fantasy offense. Darius Slayton was good filling in for Malik Neighbors, getting a lot of targets the last 2 weeks. Wan'Dale Robinson, we talked about the PPR scam he's in. Yeah, all of a sudden, that guy that no one likes in real life, keeping everyone fantasy relevant, keeping that offense happy. You only scored 7 points against the Bengals because it's still, you get back to it, and it's Daniel Jones.
Daniel Jones happens, but
eating. Malik Neighbors was eating. Robinson was eating.
Just got to throw Malik Neighbors the ball. It's that simple. Just keep doing it.
Hopefully he does with this weekend against the Philadelphia Eagles. All right, blind resume number 2. We're looking at wide receivers. This wide receiver, it's 23 receptions on the year, 351 yards, no touchdowns, giving you 9.7 points per game. But again, drafted within the top 4 to 5 rounds. Someone that you were counting on. You're like, this is going to be my wide receiver 2 all year long. Maybe we're hoping you're going to get wide receiver 1 production. The other guy, not on your roster. Probably not on a lot of rosters right now, but we're talking 17 receptions, 273 yards, and 2 touchdowns, averaging 9.6 points per game. That investment in that wide receiver 1, that's producing at the same guy who's on the waiver wire right now. That wide receiver 1 is Brandon Ayuk.
I've completely erased that guy in my mind somehow.
As has everyone. But there's a couple of teams, and we were talking about it with the Green Bay Packers. It's the same thing with Brandon Ayuk and Deebo Samuel. You have to play them for that 1 week they go off. You have to play Deebo Samuel because he can get 3 catches, 100 yards, and a touchdown. Or it could be the day where they just feature Brandon Ayuk, and he goes 7 catches for 80 yards. Guys, you have to play. But this is fantasy football. And these are the investments and difference between the risk and reward. And the wide receiver 2, Rashad Bateman in the blind.
Bateman. I looked at him on waivers. I was like,
As Brandon Ayuk, and it's someone that could be sneaking up there with bye weeks hitting now. If injuries arise, hey, yeah, Zay Flowers is going off, but Bateman could be a viable guy because we haven't seen consistency with the tight ends. Everyone We've talked about Mark Andrews. We've lived that life. Isaiah Likely. Cole, we saw a couple weeks ago. Think about it. Rashad Bateman pacing Brandon Ayuk right now.
I believe it.
And that's what's I like about fantasy football is you have to take risks. You have to do things that don't feel good, go against the grain. We're all taking Patrick Mahomes over everyone else. We still are in football because that dude's proven it. He's winning championships. Doesn't matter the offense. If it's an average offense, you get to the postseason, they make plays. But in fantasy, it's not that simple. But I think there's some people that just think, hey, it's Patrick Mahomes. You drafted him in the second round, you drafted him in the third round, and you're starting him every single week in your fantasy league. And there might be better options, or it might be an opportunity to see if someone else in your league would fall in love with the name Patrick Mahomes and trade him for like an RB2 or wide receiver 2. And just start playing
that would be
waiver wire.
Yeah, that would be ideal.
Play Geno Smith. Guys that are scoring as much, if not more points than Patrick Mahomes right now.
Yeah, it's Patrick Mahomes. You're playing him. He's almost hurting you in that lineup. Still Patrick Mahomes though, so he's gonna get played.
Yeah,
I think I'm with you. I was like, I would like to trade him for something that brings value. I don't think people are still living off of his. How many touchdowns was it? 55? I don't remember. How many?
It hasn't been the same offense the last few years. He's been a check down.
How long ago was that now?
Like 3-4 years ago.
Was it 5 years ago? 2019? When was this? I'm trying to remember.
So in 4-point passing touchdown leagues this year, Mahomes, his game log, 15, 12, 16, 13, 13. But you're drafting this dude to get you 20 points per game with what you invested.
Yeah, easily. That's what you're really hoping for, where you invested in him.
He's going to be up there with Lamar Jackson and what Anthony Richardson or these guys that you're looking at. Lamar Jackson, you're going to get the extra rushing potential, but Mahomes is going to keep you in there with the passing touchdowns. I think it's one of the most fascinating things in fantasy football, and it just tells you the sport overall. The name brand. That's also life. We're hooked on name brand things, but especially in fantasy football, the name brand of Patrick Mahomes. Where I think it's fascinating too, because you look at the league that we're in together. The Patrick Mahomes owner has Joe Burrow, and he's still starting Patrick Mahomes over Joe Burrow. And I'm just like, you can't do that.
I mean, if you're a homer, it wouldn't be the first time I've seen it. I've watched teams sync with starting Dallas players because they love Dallas.
What's happened to Dallas? I thought Dak was going to be fantasy viable this season. It's been rough. 3-3, 3 points for Dak Prescott. You had Troy Aikman this week come out slamming every wide receiver, and CeeDee Lamb was in that mix saying they run bad routes. Oof. We knew it was going to be difficult just because it was just CeeDee Lamb, Jake Ferguson, and you're going to keep your fingers crossed you can find something in the run game, but it is bad right now in Dallas.
Yeah, I didn't expect it to be this bad, and it's kind of they're on red alert. Kind of, I don't know. It's like Jacksonville, the Browns. It's like you guys are getting yourself into that. It's like that's pretty bad.
And they just gave Dak Prescott a whole lot of money, so he's gonna feel it even more.
They're extra salty. Yep, all those fans. Like, we paid so much.
Not elevating anything. CeeDee Lamb.
He was better than Mahomes.
Micah I don't think you can pay Micah Parsons right now, not just because you paid everyone else. I don't think that guy's worth it. And then you're in that mess, I should say, because he's going to ask for a gigantic contract, and I don't think he is a game-changing player like a Myles Garrett, like a TJ Watt. But yet they're probably going to hand him that contract next year, and there you go.
We'll see. We will see. They were so close, and now it feels like they're so far.
Well, they can't lose this weekend because they're on bye. But you got two teams on bye, Dallas and Chicago.
Don't jinx it.
They might lose to the bye. We've seen that before with bad football teams. One game in the books, TNF football. Broncos beat the Saints, and a whole lot of Week 7 football on deck. 2 Monday night games, by the way. Don't forget that. Look ahead to Arizona, and the Chargers. And could we be looking at the top 2 MVP candidates in Monday Night Football, and Lamar Jackson and Baker Mayfield?
Yeah.
Did you ever think you'd say that sentence in your life?
Baker, no, but I've kind
The
of
two-time NFL MVP Lamar Jackson. Yes,
liked Baker a little bit.
But Baker balling out right now.
It's see what happens when you're not on the Browns. Amari Cooper to the moon.
Amari Cooper to the moon. And Davante Adams reunited with his best friend forever. Hopefully we will be reunited with our best friend, Steven Masterson. Hopefully he's enjoying his nights. But it's been the 2 dudes with you on the 3 Dudes Fantasy Football Show. I want to thank everyone for tuning in, hanging out with us as we talk shop. And as you see, you can follow us on the X at 3DudesFFS. We got the Instagram rolling, 3 Dudes Fantasy Football. And of course, like and subscribe. Just having some fun talking fantasy football for you every single week. One last question for you, Aaron. Do you even get up and watch the Jaguars in the morning, or do you sleep in right now?
Yeah. Yes, I don't get up. I already know what's. I'll turn it on and nothing will be going on. Like I don't want to see.
Have a couple lineups lock early. Another London game.
Another London game. Yep.
Patriots and Jaguars, but just put your Patriots in your lineup. Aaron's planting his flag with the entire New England Patriots this weekend for them to go off against the Jacksonville Jaguars. Enjoy it, everyone. Have a great weekend. May the fantasy odds be in your favor. And until next time.
Later, y'all.